Welcome back to Great Day. Hearing the words, "you have cancer," can change everything in an instant. Our next guests say no one should have to face that journey alone. CanCare connects patients and caregivers with survivors who've been there, offering hope, encouragement, and emotional support when it's needed the most. Research shows hope and human connection can make a real difference during treatment and recovery. Joining us are Darcy Wells, President and CEO of CanCare, along with cancer survivor and CanCare volunteer Keith Sadoff, who is now helping others through their own cancer journey. It's come full circle for you there. All right, Darcy, before you even knew about CanCare, you knew about cancer in your family.
Yes, absolutely. So there was an 8-year period where my mother and my stepfather and my grandmother all had cancer.
Oh, wow.
And I was a long distance caregiver as they were in Colorado and I was in Texas. And it was my first real exposure to how cancer impacts the entire family, not just the person being treated.
Yeah, absolutely. And then even that whole thing of you couldn't just uproot and leave,
Right.
but you feel guilty about what you couldn't
Yes.
do, but then it could be overwhelming what you were doing.
Yes, guilty, helpless, really not knowing how you can help. And it wasn't long after that I found CanCare and I said, oh, I wish I had had this in my own cancer journey with my
Yeah,
family.
because they could fill in a different type of way that you couldn't at that point. All right, the history of CanCare, how did it get started? Everything always starts because someone recognizes the need like you did.
An amazing woman who was in her 40s when she had colon cancer. And she remembered very frankly that when she was going through the cancer journey, she saw a lot of women around her who didn't have this kind of support that she had. She said, I'm going to do something about this when I get through my cancer journey. So she founded CanCare in 1990. She's now 98 years old, and she's our biggest cheerleader, but she just started. And she found cancer survivors, and she found mental health professionals to train them up on how to provide that one-on-one emotional support. And she would go around Houston to churches, find survivors, train them, and deploy them back into the churches. And now, 36 years later, we're thriving. We've supported over 1 million people in the 36 years since she founded the organization.
And you said she's 98 years old.
Yes.
What that says is like you're going to get to the other side of that cancer and keep living.
That's right.
Right?
That's right. There is hope.
Yeah. All right. And the mission again is that cancer patients are paired with a survivor who can more relate to what they're dealing with. All right, Keith, life is rocking along for you, and then all of a sudden, what happens?
So
I say all of a sudden, but it wasn't really all of a sudden because you went through a battle, just like we heard earlier, of trying to figure out what was wrong. Right?
It wasn't, it was a year finding out what was actually wrong. When I finally did end up going to the hospital because I had felt the pain that I just couldn't explain. While I was there, the doctor ended up calling me back after they did some scans and said, don't leave the hospital, you have cancer.
You were still in the hallway when they called you back to let you know, after a year of trying to figure out what was going on.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so I fell to my knees. I was overwhelmed at the time. I was 43 years old, or 45 years old. I had a thriving business, 2 children, a marriage, and I just didn't know how I was going to do this.
Yeah.
I immediately thought, I'm a dead man.
And you're thinking about your family, how you're going to leave your family. So you were already ending things before things were really starting to begin.
Absolutely.
And then you have your family loves you, and you always know you can go to your family. But I think a lot of people who are dealing with something will hold back because you want to appear to be the strong one. You don't want to burden them.
Exactly. And I think, when I first got diagnosed, I had such tremendous support from my family, from friends, from my work team that I was involved with. But there was a part of me that still felt truly alone, that nobody really understood what I was going through. And it wasn't until I found CanCare that I found someone, a survivor, that called me and said, hey, my name is Leonard and I'm here to support you.
Tell me what that did for you, that moment that you could sit down and go, okay, I can unload on this person because they understand what I'm feeling.
I did,
and
Leonard will share with you, he said, Keith really did unload on me. It was the first person that I could just feel like I was totally honest with.
You could feel vulnerable,
about what I was feeling. Because you're right, as a man, as a practice owner, I was trying to be strong, for everyone. But when I realized, that I had somebody there that could really understand what I was going through, it made a world of difference. He became my lifeline through this process, and he was so adept at calling at just the right time when I needed that support.
Yeah, all right. I mentioned earlier that studies show when somebody is there who can say, I got your hand, I got your back, I understand when you say this, I understand it.
Yes.
Not the exact same story or feeling, but I understand it. Studies show that really helps in the healing process.
Absolutely. So when we were first founded, I think we believed that this having hope in the cancer journey could be beneficial, but now research is actually backing it up, that cancer patients who have hope and they feel supported in their cancer journey, they have better health outcomes. So we're really looking at CanCare being part of the cancer care team. The doctors are focused on healing the body, but who is focused on the emotional healing and the mental health components of that?
As you say, the prescription that doctors can't write.
That's right. That's right. And so we surround the patient and we provide that comfort and that emotional support that typically healthcare providers just can't do.
Yeah, all right. Then you made the decision that you're through and you're like, okay, all right. Leonard, you were right, okay?
Right.
And then you made the decision to become a CanCare volunteer. What has that experience been like for you?
It's been tremendous. It took me a long time to get to this point, and I found out Darcy was doing a podcast for CanCare, and I called and I said, I think I'd like to be a part of that. And she said, the elephant in the room is you're not a volunteer yet, 20 years later. Why not? And I thought, why not?
Yeah, because sometimes I always say you might not choose a mission, the mission will choose
Yes.
you.
Absolutely.
This one chose you.
It did, and I found, and a lot of the volunteers I think will say the same thing, that the fulfillment you get by extending that hand out and bringing someone else along rewards you 10 times what you feel like you're giving to that person. And also when I'm there visiting with people sitting in their chemo chair, and I walk in and I say, I'm here with CanCare, I'd like to talk with you. And I tell them, I've been in that chair too 20 years ago. That's when they say, come on in and let's talk.
Yeah, because you're like, this is 20 years past, right? Okay, so you need more survivor volunteers.
We do. So we're growing. The need for our services is growing. And so we need people like Keith who have been there, who are survivors and cancer caregivers. So we not only match people facing cancer with a survivor, we also match family members. So someone like me who's caring for a parent with cancer can be matched with someone who cared for a parent. And to have that survivor by your side, very different dynamic.
Yeah, all right, the book.
Yes, so in celebration of our 35th anniversary, we published this book called Hope in the Face of Cancer, and it's full of stories from survivors and caregivers and healthcare professionals, and it's just about hope. It's about their journeys, their very raw journeys, and the hope that they have. And we hope that if someone doesn't pick up the phone and call CanCare for support, that having something like this in their hands can provide them that hope, and they can see someone whose story is the same as theirs, and they say, I can do this.
Yeah, and what's great about this book too is like you don't have to have cancer to get something out of this book.
That's right.
It's just anybody facing that insurmountable tough time, and you see what people went through and how they got to where they needed to be. All right, you two, thank you so much for sharing about CanCare. Thank you so much for finding your mission, and bringing it full circle. You can buy the book Hope in the Face of Cancer on Amazon, and if you're a cancer survivor and would like to volunteer or you want to learn more about their emotional support opportunities, visit cancare.org. Again, they will train you up to make you a person of hope for somebody else who's going through the toughest time in their life at that moment.